We're recording.
Okay, there's the light. Yep.
Welcome, everyone, to today's meeting of the Blue Ribbon. I wish I could.
Here's
June,
Blue Ribbon.
June 27th. I was like, what day is today? Thank you all for being in here. We have, as most of you saw, we have a hard stop at 6:45 because there's another committee in here. So we will hop right into the roll call. I am Assistant Mayor Kelly, Councillor Tabor,
Here.
Tracy, here, Eric,
Here.
Megan,
Here.
Dagan,
Here.
Mary,
Here.
Byron is absent, John,
Here.
Beth, here. Perfect. And for city staff, we have the Director of Planning and Sustainability, Peter, and then we have our Housing Navigator, Howard. And then I would look for an approval of the minutes for 6:13.
Didn't get
We
We did not get them exactly. Yes, we did totally.
We moved in.
Those are.
can skip that.
We're gonna skip
Postpone
that.
that.
I was like saying it out loud and looking up for Byron, and I was like, he's not here.
Gave us the slip.
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, so our next item are community member remarks. There's been a couple conversations and worry, as it should be, and requests for information about residential growth impacts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to add too, you know, our unofficial rule is if any committee member wants to put an item on the agenda, we do that, and we've done that in a variety of cases. So.
Okay, so we'll hand, this request was set forth by a couple members, but formally set forth by John, not Mr. O'Leary tonight, just John.
Good, thank you.
So I'll let you have the floor. We have conversational
And I'll
talk.
try to keep it brief.
Eric, did you want to be recognized?
I'm sorry, I should have put in a suggestion, but I do have some questions since
Thank you.
we had phrased the committee member remarks, okay? Just some questions that hopefully I can get in at this time, but John, go ahead.
Okay, ready? One of the things I just wanted to mention was that at the last meeting, I made some reference to a question that had been raised with regards to abatements. And the reason I raised the question was that if a member of the public expresses something, I think that we should at least get an understanding, and so that was the purpose of my question. It's not something that I'm advocating. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if it's not something that can be done under enabling legislation or not, but I'm just waiting for that response. But at the time when I raised it, if I can, Jim mentioned a point that I think is very important, and the fact is he suggested, and I hope I'm saying it correctly, that abatements, although it may benefit a segment of the population, does have a negative impact on the remainder of the taxpayers who now have to pick up those additional charges. And so one of the things that it made me think about is the fact is that as we go through this process, I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind is that if we do something, what is the possible negative impact on the existing population here in Portsmouth and the existing taxpayers? And that leads me to a discussion regarding a couple of the other items that we talked about last week. One is with regards to Commerce Way. One of the things, and I do understand the fact is that commercial property and especially office property is not getting the utilization that it had in the past. So we have vacancies. How do we address that? One of the things we do need to think about is that when Commerce Way or Heritage or Constitution or any of those places were built, it was built at a time that the city was trying to, frankly, increase taxable income in a way that didn't have a negative impact on utilization of taxes. So in effect, commercial properties pay good taxes, but don't use the same services as residential properties. And one of the things that we do need to think about, and again, this kind of carries on to the discussion we had last week, there was a brief discussion about some of our zoning with regards to two-bedroom versus three-bedroom, et cetera. And one of the things that, I'll just say off the top of my head is that when we start talking about the number of bedrooms, we're talking about children, and we're talking about students, and we're talking about education. And one of the things and I'm not saying that this is something that is a deal breaker one way or another, but it needs to be taken into consideration. Based on a rough estimate, the cost of educating a student in the city of Portsmouth is, depending on what you use for your numerator, is anywhere from $26,000 to $30,000 a student. And, and where you get that is roughly 2,500 students, $64,000 for the school budget, and then if you include the capital end of it, it makes about $75,000. Also, to get another measurement, the students that come into the city of the Portsmouth School District from SAU 50, and this is the only number I could get, it's roughly $22,000 to $23,000 that we charge SAU 50 for those students at the middle school and the high school. So that gives you an idea that students are expensive. So when we start talking about, and one of the things we've talked about here is we've talked about units, whether it be 200 or 500 units, but we haven't really talked about what that unit consists of. And that there is a difference between, like we were talking about, I'll use the term, and I'm not sure if this is what we ended up with, communal housing. That, frankly, doesn't have a lot of students involved. You start moving up to three-bedroom units, you're going to have students involved. So we just need to make that, take that into consideration as we go forward. I just don't want it to be ignored that when we start talking about units that involve children, there are tax implications that we have to take that we should take into consideration.
Yeah. Sir, do we just want to, if anyone has any other?
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I mean, there's got to be a fiscal impact, and I don't know whether it's within the realm of this committee or someone to measure that impact in some capacity, whether it's schools, whether it's police, whether it's, a variety of the, municipal services that the city provides, just because there's that type of impact.
I would say to some degree that's out of the scope of this committee. That is something that's done through TAC and through Planning Board when they look at an impact. I will say I want to just make sure, while we do have roughly a little over 2,400 students in our schools right now, that number is steadily decreasing. And one of the things that I want to make sure that we talk about as when we're looking at this holistically inside Portsmouth, outside of Portsmouth, and I finally was able, that multifamily housing conference that I spoke at a couple weeks ago, finally was able to get the slides, and they're uploaded, and I will get that all sent out to you. But one of the really interesting things that was talked about was this exact and one of the panelists called it an emotional response to building, which is we're going to get more kids and we're going to increase our budget because of school resources. And we always tend to pinpoint school. But in reality, we've seen that the number of units that have been built over the last 10 years has increased steadily, but our school population has decreased steadily over the last 10 years. But I agree with you that everything, and I think that the city planning staff and the planning board and the zoning boards all take in account police resources, they take in water resources, school resources. So while I am not the deciding vote in this group, I do think that is potentially, while we should have that conversation organically, and especially as a community we need to, I think that I personally, my belief system is that we should not go down the road of not building because we're worried about kids. We also have to remember, population-wise, that we are one of the oldest states in the country, and we are losing more young people than we are through migration. We're losing more people in childbearing ages, and gaining older people at a rate of migrating out, people 65 and older migrating out at a rate of 42.5, immigrated into our state at a rate of 46.3. So we're actually gaining older people. So I would say, when we look at multifamily, yes, when you get into 3 bedrooms, then you're actually accessible for a family of 1 or more kids. But we see that there are families that live in 2 bedrooms, sometimes 1 bedrooms, sometimes studios, depending on fiscal. But I want to make it very obvious to everyone that the city does take into account for every single development. There's great resources on the DPW website, Wastewater 101, that actually talks about how even though the amount of units that have increased in the city, the water usage has actually decreased due to more sustainable planning, more sustainable water treatment and things like that. So we just want to make sure, and I think, Megan emailed me and with a very specific question that I was able to give a specific answer to. So I would say that if we have any specific questions about growth and population concern, those should be directed to the chairs. We can direct them to staff so we can get actual numbers to look at. I think when we talk about the taxes, if and when we get to the discussion of any type of payment in lieu of program, we would bring the assessor's office in here. During budget season, when we decide to renew any disabled or veterans tax credit, the assessor comes in and gives us an actual number of what that tax impact is going to be per the thousand per the next resident, so that we can make sure that if it's $50 per thousand, that is a huge impact, per resident, per property owner, versus if it's 23 cents. And then we kind of have to weigh the scales of what that feels like.
If I could, I think it's an important question to ask. If we make recommendations to the city council and the council says, well, have you thought about the tax impacts? We have to have an answer.
Yeah.
So it's an important discussion to have. And I followed up on John's request and we had a conversation, and I tried to put some questions together for staff so that we can inform ourselves. Such as, right now we have 938 kids in the elementary school. And if we're talking about impact of kids in the schools, it's going to start in the elementary schools. That's been steadily tailing down. But the question to me would be, what's the kid impact of the Court Street housing? What's the kid impact of Cinemagic? What's the kid impact of, what's the proportion of children to units, say at Gosling Meadows or, Wamasit or any of our other housing, so that we could get a sense for, do units necessarily, what's the relationship between units and kids? And then for Zach, the school superintendent, what's our headroom in the elementary schools if we want to have decent, optimum class sizes? And we'll set aside the issue of redistricting. That's a school board issue. Byron's not here. We don't have to torture him with it. But we've got infrastructure of 3 elementary schools, and if we add, say, our goal of 500 units, and they look like some of these other things I mentioned, what would the impact be? And what would Zach tell us, it would mean in terms of capacity? Would we need to add capacity? Would we need to add portable classrooms and teachers? So I think that would give us some data. And then, if we have 500 units of the type we're looking at, what's the water impact? What's the sewer impact? What's the fire? What's the police? And, we could get that data so that when we're asked, what's this going to mean to the services and infrastructure of the city, we have some answers. And I think it's a good question, and I think we should take it seriously and get the data. So if that's agreeable to you, John, I could write those up and share them.
Mr. Anderson.
If we're done with that subject, there was a couple other issues I wanted to bring forward. Maybe the answers is there or not. I guess if we follow the news, we understand that the RFQ process is done, and there's going to be a selection of for the eight candidates or the submission to submit an RFP process. I guess that's the way I understand it, and if anything different than what I'm saying, I'd appreciate just how it's going to go, because I think it was one of the original, this is where this committee started. Its first purpose was writing a letter for $3 million in support of PHA to get a project going. Sure. Okay. And
I would, just before you go any further on that, I would say that this council and the staff has no more updates from the last meeting. The city manager has not given any, we have no more updates on the status of the finalists of the RFQ.
okay, fine. But we probably do assume that it's going to go into an RFP process.
We do not know,
We do not know. Okay.
as was written in the RFQ.
All right. Well, if we do, and I think there's some logic that it would go there, but if it's not there yet, it's not there, and we're just going to have to stand by for it to develop. But I mean, I just think of this sensitivity within this committee, at least myself, is to know when and if that RFP process develops with 4 contenders to put housing together in some way, shape, and manner. What is the city's position going to be to announce an RFP process from? And I guess we're talking Sherburne?
Yeah,
Right.
I guess
But-
what I could say just before we go down a longer road, because we can talk about this during the Housing Navigator update, is that I would assume that the city manager will have an update for the city council at our July 15.
Her last email said that she'd have an update in process on July 15th, but we won't have the results until August 3rd.
Yes. So when there's a public update of the process, which will be at the July 15th, the city council has no meetings until then. Then it will be brought to this group, that update, and then if this group would like to formulate a response to the city council or to the city manager's office, we can then do that.
Okay, and finally, if it hasn't been announced, I'll bet some money that it will be announced, and we'll go into an RFP process. We'll go into an RFP process with 4 contenders to submit an RFP, and the consistency that RFP is going to be presented to the developers from a density level. Is it going to be, since we have 4 different, versions of proposals coming in, what are they going to base their RFP on? 80 units, 160
I would say that would go through the staff and the working group that is helmed by the city manager, and then would be released to the council and tend to this committee. I understand it's frustrating that I don't have the answers that you potentially are looking for.
I don't mind if we don't have the answers, but
Yeah.
I think the questions are relevant to this
I
committee's.
do not disagree. I think that would be things that if this process went through RFP and this committee wanted to solidify or send any letters of recommendation or bullet points to the city manager's office, we can definitely do that. But at this point, what it would be in an RFP is not, I don't know, because there is no RFP out.
Well, any dialogue that can help that discussion go forward, I think, is helpful for us to know what we expect to come back.
Yeah.
And whether it's going to come back to this
I would tell
committee
you the
for
city
at least-
councilors don't even know the 4th. That will be made public at.
And I'm going to ask too, since we made up an agenda for tonight, does the committee want to continue to talk about Sherburne at this point?
No.
Just show of hands.
No.
Okay.
I'm like, no.
Okay. So I promise to have the update as soon as we have the update from the city manager, and then again we can discuss at our next meeting, which is subsequent to that.
Our next meeting is July 11th.
So it's right before.
Yep.
So then our August meeting, which again
will be
as-
right after our August 3rd meeting, so we will have it updated.
So we
that
will
way.
have a better update of that. Okay.
City-owned land.
Okay. Do you want to?
Sure. We left last time saying one of our action areas in the near term was the city-owned properties, and we refined some of the criteria. What you had in your packet was the last cut at it that the Beth's Land Use Committee did, which is a great starting point. I think it'd be a great outcome tonight if we could decide on some steps to take moving forward over the summer. If we want to go see these sites, we want to orchestrate that. But we also, Howard, did you have additional? Yeah,
It's our grading sheet.
it's our grading sheet. So we got one for everybody? Okay.
We do, but you're out in front and,
Okay.
Howard, do you want to?
Moving too fast.
well, no, you
Okay.
can talk goals and process, and then I can quickly step in and discuss data, and then we can go back to goals and process if you wish. Or I can just jump in.
Well, goals and process, you know,
Okay, that's what I thought. I don't want this.
we know these are waiting for us to evaluate. We know that they have their relative advantages and disadvantages, but what they all have is an opportunity to put more below-market rate housing into the community. And I think it would be a great thing for this committee if we were able to say at the end of our 2 year and a half together, we got some additional below-market rate housing into the community through these properties. So how do we go about doing that? You know, we've seen with the Sherburne process, we recommend the city council is inclined to act. So the question would be, how do we go at that? And it's all sitting out there waiting for us. John?
Well, I think, I think there's a couple of different things we have to think about. And one of them, at one of the earlier meetings, I think Beth mentioned that, we may be, we may be in a situation where we're dealing with multiple contractors, if you will. So I think that the RFP process will be the RFQ process right now will be interesting. And the fact is, the staff and, through the city manager will be identifying entities that they feel are appropriate. And I think that we may end up in a situation where there are multiple entities that frankly can do the job. And then we might be in a situation where we can look at doing more than one in a similar time frame. So I think that the RFQ process and what we find out there for entities that can work with the city, I think will have a lot to do with, other pieces of property. So, we can certainly take steps going forward. But, for instance, let's just say for talking purposes that the city manager and the staff recognize that there's only one entity that they really will think the city should work with. Well, that will certainly impact because they may not be able to do multiple projects at the same time. So I'm just saying that we can certainly move forward, and I agree with you that we should, but also there are some unknowns out there that will certainly impact what we do.
Let's go to Howard for the data on these.
So there's a little bit of a background. The Land Use Committee, when it was in action, undertook an effort to start this, and so it's being carried forward into this committee. What I sent out in the packet that you saw was the original data set with all the city-owned land. And through this, we can think that we don't want to take down the parking garage and housing.
Don't want to lose
So, what the Land Use Committee did was we started, and largely with Beth's effort, is started to go through all of this and say, what are reasonable, what can be taken out that is just either fully developed or not available, wetlands and so forth. So from what you had in your packet, which was I referred to as the original data set, there was a revised data set that went out. And we started getting a little bit up in the air, and then we started getting closer to the ground, and I also included that. I just included it so the committee members understood the process and the thinking that went forward to what we're going to end up with at the end.
Does the green mean to go forward?
Yeah.
The green was more likely. I like to use green as go.
That's what I was
Yellow is slow and red is stop.
That's what I was.
I'm very simple that
If
way.
you ever see just blue and green on a data, you know it came from Beth. So, and so we ended up with this list of 7 properties, which came through, and then, as has been previously discussed, when Nick was here, he and I went out and did a walking tour of these properties. And that was in the report that was handed out to you. And it's this one dated May 3rd, 2023. So you understood some of the higher level criteria that we started thinking about. Again, this was not highly scientific, but it was the ranking system that we had seen and discussed before. And then there are these locations, and said, well, for instance, if we take 134 Preble Way, there's an active here. It's wooded here, but it's an active pathway. So it started ranking lower on some of the criteria. What John started speaking to, and I'm going to hand out, is the combination of the staff report and the criteria that this committee brought up at the last meeting. So somehow mine disappeared.
John stole it.
I got my mitts.
So there is the community impact, quality of life, and land value were 3 additional ranking criteria that the Housing Committee came up with. And you can see on the spreadsheet that I handed out, there isn't any ranking in there.
Right.
There's additional properties that are added that had been mentioned by others. So this is just really all this background, and we're ready to take our first step on it. The rankings can certainly change. If you agree, you can keep them. If you don't. You can change it, and then we start filling out. What I would like to hear from the committee is, while we have slightly more aspirational criteria that's been added, to me, it's a little bit harder to quantify what exactly. I think if we went around, everybody here would have a slightly different ranking system when it comes to quality of life and environmental impacts. So community impact, as John spoke about, he may rank community impact more based upon school and taxation, and then community impact for others may be a little bit more environmental based. So if we could get a little bit clarification on those, the idea is that we could, as a committee, go out and do walking tours and start all going out and having a equally shared mind's eye of what this property is and whether it can be crossed off or to remain. So 134 Preble Way is in there that we just saw up on the screen. It's adjacent to a park. It's city-owned land. But the park obviously is not in play, but it's a steep area that is fully wooded. And it is a steep area that is fully wooded. And it is a steep area that is fully wooded. And it is a steep area that is fully wooded. And it is a steep area that is fully wooded. And it is a steep area that is fully wooded. And it is a steep area that is fully wooded. And it is a steep area that is fully wooded. And it is a steep area that is fully wooded. And it is a steep area that is fully wooded. And it is a steep area that is fully wooded. And it is a steep area that is fully wooded. And it is a steep area that is fully wooded. And it is a steep area that is fully wooded. And it is a steep area that is fully wooded. And it is a steep area that is fully wooded. And it is a steep area that is fully wooded. And it is a steep area that is fully wooded. And it is a steep area that is fully wooded. And it is a steep area that is fully wooded. And it is a steep area that is fully wooded. And it is a steep area that is fully wooded. And it is a steep area that is fully wooded. And it is a steep area that is fully wood but it's also a community neighborhood resource. So maybe it needs to completely come off the list. It's up for this committee to discuss, but these are the ones that seem to have at least some ability for some type of consideration. And this is what I will send out to the committee per Byron's request for an electronic file. So,
Really, so like Sherburne Avenue is on there, which is the neighborhood playground, where, and we're already losing a ball field in the neighborhood as well.
It's
right, but
it's conservation restriction, actually.
No,
Okay.
Sherburne Avenue off Colonial Drive in Sherburne, established neighborhood park.
It's the park and
It's a
Panaway.
park.
so yes, it's a park, and then half of it's wooded, but it's not really accessible. So it was just added to the list, and it can certainly, through conversation, come on. So.
I guess I thought we were working off of the 11 that were already there. Or like whatever ones we narrowed it down, the city had narrowed it down to the first time.
Those 7.
Yeah.
I think,
Whatever.
I
They're the
think
first 7.
at the last meeting, there were comments made about adding more properties in. So I think that's where Howard then kind of went through. But I'm totally amenable if the group is amenable to sticking towards these more vetted 7 that have kind of been vetted over the last year and a half of work. If that is, that's this list.
So is this 7 the 7?
The first 7, Megan, that you see with numbers in terms of ranking is what the staff had looked at a year ago.
Okay, so that's a little different than whatever this list is. This is the additional ones,
Right, so the 8th is Sherburne Avenue.
right?
Yeah, and it,
Because I thought I thought there was discussion at like land use about the old skate park, and so I don't see that on the list here.
That was,
yeah.
Because it was being a skate park.
yeah.
But it's not anymore.
Oh, the old skate
The
park.
old skate park.
We don't have control of that right now because it's leased.
That's deed, yes.
What would it take to we've heard that there's deed restrictions, but it's a sizable piece of property. It has advantages for development, but the deed restriction seems to be the most overpowering situation. What does it take to unravel that? I mean,
Got to sign off.
Right.
What's
Yeah,
that?
the Coast
Coast
Guard.
Guard.
Sign off.
That's federal land.
It's federal land.
That federal land was given, it was.
Is that the deed restriction
I believe.
through the Coast Guard, or is it another arrangement with Wamisit or some of the other development around?
Well,
there?
it's leased out currently to, thank you. I'm like one of those places.
Yes.
The building is leased out. The land is restricted. I'm pretty sure when I asked about this, we were told for recreation purposes only, I believe is what the restriction is from the Coast Guard.
Could we confirm that because it's?
I'm
it's
sure
a-
the chairs can find out.
I'm sure that I can ask Peter to
That's on
confirm that.
Greenleaf, right?
It's on Greenleaf,
Note to
right?
file.
So I just like to be clear that this list, these 7 come from the 7 that are green. That's where these 2 come from. It was just narrowing it down and down. And so some of the things like, so the Greenland Road property at 16 acres, it looked really good to me. I was really excited about it until I found out how many wells are located on that property, which then limits how much you can actually build. So
Right.
some of those, that's why I asked staff to go and start looking at and just tell us what kind of conservation and restrictions and deed restrictions do we have on a lot of these properties. And then that's what sort of started to narrow it all down.
Sure, I remember that. And then are either the Banfields or Ocean Road reference, is this like community campus, or I'm trying to just like place it?
Banfield is the place next to the railroad tracks, the house that they took down last year.
The teepee house.
The teepee
Wayne's house.
The teepee house.
Wayne.
And so the city acquired it, and my understanding is that, and it does say it here, is that that was hopefully going to be a parking access for the
Rail trail.
Real true.
Oh,
That's
got it.
what they've
But
already
it's
done.
28
design.
acres, right?
I think that's 850.
7.1.
It's 850.
Yeah.
The next one is
So many of these, I've looked at them so many times.
So that's 850 Banfield.
Doesn't have the story.
All of them have a story.
And which one is this regular Banfield? The 28 acres?
We own a bunch between Banfield and Ocean that is all wetlands.
wetlands.
So there's a few that might have a little bit like, yeah, I'm trying to find
But
out.
access
small
on
pocket
it
of
might not be
buildable
easy.
land.
Right, lots of wetlands buffer, pocket possible, but I'm talking like small pockets. That's the issue which downgrades them is because there's such small pockets of land that are not in the buffer or wetland that it makes it, and right, and with the rail trail all going through there, it's going to make it more difficult to want to, yeah.
Right.
We could take further look at it. I'm all about it. It was just at that point, we were trying to take the easy ones that we knew we could quickly move forward with at least one or two and the rest keep looking at.
And I'll research like more so I understand like the environmental impacts of like wetlands. But I'm wondering too, just like given where we live, should we be creatively looking at how to be able to live and build on wet areas? I mean, like, I have seen stuff online, so you know it's very credible, but they're like building stuff that's like prepared for flooding and different things. And
We have a lot of properties that currently sit in our wetland buffer. For those that don't know, our wetland buffer is 100 feet. So for 100 feet, around every wetland is a buffer. There is certainly a lot of, when we change that to 100 feet, there's a lot of properties that are entirely in a buffer right now, but they're existing.
Right.
I can tell you the planning board has been very much against allowing someone to entirely build a building within the buffer right now. We, allow a lot of things, but we try not to allow an entire building to be built in a buffer, so.
And I would assume any type of changes like that would require approval from DES and state agencies and things like that.
If you wanted to actually go into a wetland, oh yeah.
Yeah.
You would have to have state.
or if you're in a prime wetland buffer or a tidal wetland buffer.
Yeah.
The
Right.
state would have to approve it.
The
Right.
buffers are there to protect the wetlands, not to protect the houses.
Right.
That's right.
So that's why we try to limit how much building is in a buffer.
That was one of the, and I think it's an important fact that you just brought up, Mike, and I think you and I talked about this like a year ago or something like that, like about community campus. So when community campus was purchased, there was no up-to-date survey of the land, and so there was a lot of conversation about what could possibly go there. And then I think the last survey was done in like the 80s or early 90s.
Right. Ancient.
It was very older than I think I am. We are.
Yes.
Not me.
It's there you go.
Not me.
And so, as the staff has done informal surveys, we've realized that there's a lot more wetlands out there and a lot less buildable land. Because I know community campuses, not necessarily in this group, has come up, but I know in the community over the last couple of years, community campus was a really a hot topic. My understanding was that the prior council had the notion of putting some type of housing and things in there. That has been rebuffed by former Mayor Beckstead, said that I was incorrect in that conversation that I thought I knew. But that's a good example
It's
of,
not the last time.
yes. Yes. But
There are ways, I guess, that some private owners can swap wetlands or create new wetlands as an offset, but it's not easy to do.
There's mitigation
And
tactics.
it's allowed at the state level, but we don't have a mechanism at the city level.
Right.
And like Councilor Moreau said, the planning board's pretty tough, and the Conservation Commission on, we've impacted a lot of wetlands in our history here, and I think the idea is to try to save what we have left.
sure. Yeah, I get that.
And I think, I mean, there's certainly people who have found ways to, if you will, tie together highlands, for lack of a better term, and develop it, but that involves a significant cost as far as doing it, and that wouldn't fit into what we're trying to do here. The cost of developing those with tying pieces together, that's why those properties sell for the prices they sell for.
Well, I'll use an example of off of Banfield Road, we have a fairly new development that they had to cross the wetlands in order to get in. And we went through a lot to create this pathway through and under that roadway, so that animals and things and all the little creatures that need to traverse could still do that, but get to the uplands to actually build. But a lot of those also have a large portion of acreage that is going to conservation. The same thing with the Parson Woods. It's like 100 acres, right? There's a bunch of actual public trails that will end up going out to those wetland trails when that development's done. That's all been worked into those deals. So there are a lot of ways to do it, but sometimes you have to be creative.
Yeah, that's good. Well, that's why we're all here.
And have money. Those are all private people willing to spend the money.
I think Beth knows this better from the planning board, her years on the planning board, but if you can go around a wetlands obstacle, that may be the smarter way to go. And we're preserving open space too, which is a goal of the city as well. I'm sensitive to Howard's desire that we get a little more clarity around these new criteria: community impact, quality of life, environmental, and land value. Anyone?
So I'll speak to community impact because that was something that I had kind of brought up. And I think, sort of piggybacking off of John a little bit, we're looking at areas to add more density or add additional housing, what is that area losing? So I know that I've heard from a lot of community members, they're upset about losing, green space. I know there's money set aside for a girls' softball field, but where is that going to go? And these are just like questions that are coming up. And if we're looking at like where young families are able to live, can we do that sort of generic assessment of our area to understand, okay, so we definitely don't want to lose Preble's ball field because, the Heights definitely use Hislop and the kids go and play there. I know the girls' softball field does get used, but I just think it's important that we kind of think about those things. And I know we're talking about trails that people are using, and that's a positive thing in their neighborhood. And so I want that to be part of the discussion. So that's kind of what I was thinking when I was looking at community impact. We want to make sure that we're not losing too much in order to gain. And if we do have to lose something, what can we add as part of that loss, if that makes sense?
So Megan, would you make a category to community impact of being loss of existing community resource? Right?
Yeah, or green space, community space. I mean,
That's a resource.
yeah.
Right. So, trying to make it more descriptive in community impact, but not everyone's going to have a park involved. So that's why I'm asking for somewhere in between.
Loss of a community resource sounds great.
Yeah.
I
Dang it.
think that's
I don't see.
I think you could fix that.
Go ahead.
I think you could fix that by taking quality of life and putting that with community impact and leaving environmental impacts on its own.
Because you could say loss of green space is
Is a community, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's both, but in this instance, it would be, losing a park is obviously not environmental impact, but it's probably more of a community impact than it would be of what we're talking about with wetlands.
Right. And when you say community, are you talking about the neighborhood or community as in Portsmouth?
I view it all together, even though we need to microscope in on certain places.
Should we add neighborhood and should we separate neighborhood and community?
No.
No, I think they're all intertied.
I think that's getting too
I also, I completely agree with everything you're saying, Megan, and we do need to consider all this. I think we should also be mindful of what we are actively losing right now, not what we could potentially be losing. But those things need to be weighed.
Yeah, that's the
yeah.
trade-off.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
I don't see traffic as any type of weighted measure here. Would that be incorporated in community impact?
I would say that's under infrastructure. Available utilities and infrastructure.
That's a broad
so
statement.
infrastructure would include traffic. We're thinking.
That's what I would look at roads.
Roads.
yeah.
And some of these things can apply to different sets of criteria. They can be both.
Yeah.
If we try to get too granular, we're going to somehow need a longer piece of paper.
Because we do
We're going to
have
need Santa's list.
Yeah, we do have proximity to employment services and recreational amenities as a separate. Yes, Tracy.
What is our objective here tonight? Are we trying to reprioritize this or to whittle it down? Like, what's our goal of
The
this?
priority,
yes, sorry.
Tracy, is to make sure that we have all our evaluating criteria established, so we can then take this and go out and walk the site, and people can rank.
I think the land use board looked at it and with city staff from a very technical standpoint. What could we build on with the least amount of structure for affordable housing? And now we're looking at it from, I guess you would say, the community impact, personal impact of
People impact.
of people.
Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yep, I think so.
It's not intended to go through every property right now and start going through rankings. It's to establish your criteria so you can go out, meet together, walk the site, and come to a new ranking.
And these final three on the spreadsheet were the ones that kind of were discussed at the last meeting, which is land value. How much is that land worth if it's worth selling versus keeping as in the city realm and developing quality of life, environmental impacts, and community impacts, which we are, I guess, trying to break down potentially now.
Should we move on to land value?
Yeah.
I don't know who
Land
tossed that.
value can be an assessed value. It can be a perceived value after development. The land value could be, it could be the land is valuable because of being a resource. So, that's why I'm looking for a little bit more clarification about what exactly value is being considered.
John?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good point, and the fact is that I raised at one point in time, the getting an appraisal, if you will, of properties, but that's not what we're talking about here, I don't believe. Appraisal gives us how much is the property, if we wanted to sell it, how much is it worth, roughly? That's one thing, and I think that's important because when we make a decision with regard, someone makes a decision with regard to properties, we have to know what the city's commitment is. In other words, if you have a piece of property that's worth $3 million and the city commits it to housing, the city's committed $3 million. But I think what I'm hearing Howard say is that the value has something. It isn't a dollar value. It's how does it impact the neighborhood and all of that.
That's the question.
That's
I would say that this should stay at. We know that what assessed market value is what 1 point something over assessed value.
Yeah, 150%.
Yeah, 100%.
Depends where.
Yeah.
Some areas in the city, it's like 5 times what it's assessed.
I was saying one time 1.4, but that's
Yeah.
well, whatever it is.
So I would say that we should keep that at either assessed value or what what you could deem as fair market value. I want to be mindful. It would be great to be able to have all the funds to hire an appraiser to do that, but the likelihood is we'll have to just go off the assessor's opinion of 150%.
Yeah, that's fine.
Dagan.
I have some misgivings about that, just because of the potential value that it provides to the community over time, and the ability for someone to take that number and misuse it and say, well, this is a $7 million property, and they want to sell it off without considering that could potentially, an 80-year building is going to provide much more than $7 million in value over time. Not to say we should take it off, but I just wanted to express that I think there's some potential toxicity that could come out of assessing each property.
Yeah, and years ago I was trying to do a business deal with a Texan, and he would say, money is just a force to do things with. Well, in our case, land is a force to do public benefit with, right? It's not owned by it's owned by the city, which really means it's owned by all of us.
Right.
Everybody in the city. And what's the greatest public benefit we can get out of that? Well, right now, we've got a housing crisis. But we'd have to weigh it against what other public benefits we might lose. you know, something like the lower lot here at City Hall, we lose a lot of parking. But we gain density in a place that people can walk to work. There's a lot to be said for that.
Just to go a little bit on what you're saying, maybe we don't look at land value as just the dollar value, but the value to the community.
Don't we
And
have then community impact?
that's what the community loses, so they might actually be crossovers in many ways. I think it depends on what it is, right?
I think, yeah. I think one of the things, and I'm not sure how to word it and where it should fall into, is like ease of replacement. Or so like if we're losing a ball field, can we make sure that we have another ball field? If we are losing X, Y, and Z, can we make sure there is a replacement for community impact? So I guess like trying to net zero loss to some degree, if that makes sense. Mr. Anderson? Eric?
Yeah, so I look at this, and naturally you keep going to the right, and you see a score, all right? And the score seems to have some relativity to use or importance or something along that line. But are we headed in that direction, is to conduct another similar process amongst ourselves in a viewing of the land? And what were the metrics of how you, or how these numerical values were put together?
In the email you got that was attached to this, that Howard just pulled up how the city staff had scaled everything over the year and a half that the land use, and then it was sent to city staff. So that was made available to everyone. And then, yes, I think the goal is, as we've discussed in the last few meetings, is to add this board's opinion on city-owned land that the land use board, the land use committee, has sent down the road as potentially developable lots.
Yeah, and put it another way, the original rankings that produced these numbers was just basic feasibility. You know, is it too steep? Is it too wet? Is it, you know, what are the geotechnical criteria? Can you build things on it? And we're looking at adding these impacts on the community. And in fact, you know, the people impacts.
In the numbers, Eric, that you see there, you can change.
Yeah.
They're not gonna
No,
stay.
I wonder, because, I
Right.
mean, everybody has a particular, state of value, I guess, so,
Yep.
that might produce a different score, it
Yeah.
might produce
Yeah.
a different metric, it might produce
But
any.
maybe
I would
a
say
more
that's, well, Tracy,
well-rounded.
that's your homework is, but right now what we want to make sure is that, are we okay? And I'm only just pushing this because we only have 20 more minutes and we want to get to the Service Credit Union update. So right now we have community impact, quality of life, environmental impact, land value, and then we discussed different wording, correct?
Well, we talked about community impact and quality of life merging.
Okay. So before we go forward, and I'll go to Tracy after, are we as a group okay with changing community impact and quality of life as one, and then environmental impacts as a separate? So,
Yeah.
okay.
Yes, yes.
I'm just saying so that we can make sure Howard knows how to update this so that
Yeah.
it can get out
Yep.
to all of us. Tracy.
It just answered my
Okay.
questions. Yeah, I just want to make sure that we don't lose the idea of community value and that
Yes.
housing can enhance a
Yes.
community. It's not just a destructive force, but it can make a city stronger. So I want to make sure that value is captured in this. So I think by reorganizing it like that, it will help.
Yeah. There's nothing to say we couldn't create a great neighborhood.
Yes. Are we okay with those 4 metrics being added to this and then this being sent out to everyone on the committee? Any other changes? Okay.
Not tonight.
Thank you.
But before we close out on that, as Howard said, this gives us a tool to then go out and do site visits. And we've got big gaps between our meetings in July and August, but would you guys be okay if we did some site tromping between meetings? If we sent something out and said, hey, we're going to go to Falkland Way.
Do we all have to go?
No, it's a coalition of the willing, whoever.
Willing and available.
We'll get a suggestion.
Okay.
But, if you don't go,
We have its own view.
you won't have the knowledge for the debate about scoring it, so.
We'd caution you, if you go, it's one thing to go on public land and look around, but if you have to, we caution you not to trudge through personal property.
Yeah. Private property, don't.
Yeah, private property, you are not a representative of the city if you're breaking the law.
And one last thing for us to consider, we don't want to just drop in without telling the neighbors. It seems to me. I would propose that we alert the abutting neighborhoods that the Housing Committee would like to make a site visit for the purpose of evaluating for housing, and whoever wants to show up can show up.
Well, if
So
there's enough of us, it has to be publicly listed
And it has to
anyways.
be anyway. But from the very start, we alert everybody and get their input.
Yes, it's important that people know what might be going down in their neighborhood.
You don't say.
Yeah, well, to the point of maybe postcards to abutters.
I would say 2021 it was made.
Are you
it was commented
suggesting your
in
butter
Sherburne.
notices in addition to meeting notice? So a mailing?
Yeah,
Okay.
perfect.
Is that okay?
Yeah, if that works for you guys.
Into our vast budget?
If we can do postcards, we'll try to do that.
Yes,
Postcards,
17 cents
great.
apiece, yeah.
Perfect. And so now we will, thank you, everyone. So Howard will.
In
will-
5 minutes or less.
Yes,
Accurate.
yeah, and we'll get that updated and then sent out, and then the goal will be to infill your stuff. And if there's one you hate, just read it out.
Red stop, yellow caution. Green go.
So last week, I attended a charrette put on by Service Credit Union with the Workforce Housing Coalition. They had been under consideration for a while what to do with some of the property that's in the back. And if you were to go to Service Credit Union, there's, I forgot the name of the road.
Long Meadow goes across
Long
from
Meadow
Lang.
and Lang connection. On the back, there's about 25 acres, but we'll get to that. What I'm showing here to give the committee just an overview is the final presentation that Workforce Housing put together. So there's description about the players. Service Credit Union gave a speech describing their mission, and largely is dedicated to giving back to the community. Workforce Housing Coalition is to educate, engage communities, municipalities to make sure that there's diverse housing options that are brought forward. Charrette format relies on realistic but open dialogue. Is to listen to the public, and in this instance, the public got together. We went through a charrette exercise where they spoke, and then a design team of professionals got together. Architects, engineers, developers, bankers, we all sat around and listened to the public, and then got together around the table and came up with some solutions. New Hampshire Housing was there, private sector development, public elements as well. We went out and took a look at the site. Here's the site that I mentioned in the back. We did a site walk, community input, and then we had an all-day work session that ended with the final presentation in the afternoon. Community listen sessions, they really wanted to go out and listen to get the public to come in. There was about 30 people or so outside of the design team that came in.
And they also did postcards.
Yeah,
They
they
did.
did postcards.
They did a lot of them.
I mean, it was in the newspaper, it was very public.
And that's still all we got.
Word cloud, so community, affordability, units. Doubts or reservations do you have about the project? Values, we asked them, they want to see neighborhood, transportation, and then smaller level, they want it to be equity, walkable, welcoming. They want to see transportation and design qualities brought it forward.
I would assume Coast was there. They've been in active conversations with Service Credit Union.
So for the purpose of the engagement, they talked about is workforce housing, AMI in Portsmouth. They said it's 131, purchase price 392. I don't know the last time a house was that much for sale. Yeah, and rental at 1770, which is 60% AMI. So I got up and gave a discussion about how this area of the city is a result of some planning that went forward, as well as a recent zoning change. The master plan considers the corridor area that comes through. Here's the study area. There is a recent change from the area that you see in yellow, which was mobile home and garden cottage, over to Gateway Corridor. And for the committee here, wanted to highlight some of the important elements of that. What it did was it brought forward more housing choices that could be brought to the property. So previously, under the GAMH, the assisted living was not allowed. Now it's allowed by special permit. More than 5 residents for a resident care facility was not allowed. Now it can be allowed through special permit process. Other interesting elements were supporting elements. So not only the housing, but now more uses that support the people that would be living there. Area. This is the area right here. There's Longfellow, Long Meadow that comes up and comes across. They noticed a lot of people using this for a cut through.
Well, they kind of have to if you want to go left. It's a requirement.
Yeah, I was like, it's not really a cut through, it's a design.
It's design.
Laying is the cut through.
They were saying it as a cut through, but it's not.
You know,
So-
it's designed on purpose.
It's on
The
purpose.
city had talked about that when I joined the planning board in 2013. And do you know how long it took us to get it?
Beachstone Apartments is up here, and Lafayette Road is down here. And so what we considered in this red area was actually the developable, given the environmental constraints of the wetlands behind. What you see in red was the high traffic volume. There's consideration for an opportunity for a stronger pedestrian connection to the visual and physical amenities of this area, as well as possibly borrowing from the parking area that's over here.
It's crazy when you see the scale, because that building, as we all know, when you drive down Route 1, is huge. So when you look at the scale.
See how much green space it has behind it. You don't realize it's
Here's a
there.
quick flyover. Here's the end. There's a lot of well fields in here, but this is the area we're considering. This was a previous truck stop, truck repair, so it's largely cleared. And then you start getting into the wetlands. This is early transitional forest that's starting to appear. There was some ledge and stone that was still there, as well as some tires. So,
Sure, there's.
The truck stop. It's got to be a tire.
here are the wetlands in the back.
What type of density units were they, was there any discussion about that?
There was, Eric, and so there was thinking about what this neighborhood could be and where it's situated in the city. We wanted to start thinking about the missing middle. And so what we thought about were different neighborhoods that this could be comparable to or not comparable to. So we considered Middle Street, Islington Corridor, Atlantic Heights. Here's an example of the vernacular of Middle Street, the density of Islington and Atlantic Heights. And I pointed out that you do not know if these are single family or two family necessarily driving down the street, so the density varies. West End Yards, South End, and Ruth Griffin were also the ideas of neighborhoods given the different densities. And I wanted to point out that you've got high density in the South End, but on this type of scale, you've got high density West End, but people, I think, consider this, and it's a larger building and it is higher density, but there is density here that's similar to this. But the thing about Ruth Griffin is that it's got some sisters, it's got some relatives sitting next to it So the scale can be changed when you start bringing in this missing middle, how it is seen next to each other. And an oversimplified way of that is if you had a single-family home next to the West End building, West End Yards, you would notice that variation in density. So what they came up with, housing diversity, neighborhood feel, connectivity, and affordability, the idea of how you could make it look like a single family, but actually have 4 residents or 3 units, parking in the back, 8 units, housing types, and they wanted to, again, those are the goals. So to answer your question on a more technical level, Eric, given the G1 and what zoning would allow in terms of density bonuses, if you were to do the full density that you were allowed, you could, through special permit, conditional use, get close to 400 units on that 11 and a half acres. So they wanted to say, well, that's one option. That's a full development of sorts. But is there a way not to do it in mass buildings? And so they came up with was trying to create variation, and I slowed down and spoke about West End and Ruth Griffin and then the South End, because those are different neighborhoods. What if we were just trying to commingle those housing types together, but still try to reach that higher density? So there's discussions, well, you've got the big building through here, could be townhomes over here. And then they said, well, if we start trying to create different neighborhoods of those single-family homes that actually have 3 or 4 units in them, and then the townhomes, the bigger buildings, the higher density here, and then maybe some set-aside. But they also brought in the consideration of, are these going to be all rentals? Could they be a combination of rental and ownership? So all these pieces were trying to be brought together in terms of what that density could be, and the use of the land remaining as residential, but needing to bring in the idea of potentially commercial use to help support the development. There were financial experts there, and so they started coming into what the construction could be, so this could be more realistic. And so they went through the development opportunities, and what was interesting is that, well, maybe some are land leases, some are for sale. Maybe some of these are units that could be provided for home ownership, deed restricted, so people could save up equity and then move on. So they wanted to also work the numbers in terms of housing choice. 30, 60, 80%, 100% of AMI, how could it work? Different developers. So those were all the considerations that were brought forward. It's just the start, but that was the effort of the charrette.
Thank you.
Great to see what the private sector can do.
And the tax credits.
When prompted. When pushed and prompted and facilitated.
Well,
I just want to highlight one more thing in the packet. There was a previous request, John, put forward about what is the success of the first-time home buyers? Do we need to take a look at the program now? Dagan, you're nodding your head, and you're part of the conversation too, to see if anything could change. And so in your packet, we put a request forward from the community development person, and she provided that report. Review it, send questions back to the chairs. I can forward it on then, and possibly she could come in for a meeting to help answer some of those questions.
Yeah, that was a very helpful summarization.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Howard.
And done in 10 minutes. Well done.
Sorry, I went over. I doubled my time allotment.
Okay, same. Okay, so we will go to public comment. If you'd like to speak, come up to the mic, say your name. Man, are you speaking?
He likes to listen.
25, I'm just going to know you're
Thank you,
listening.
and I'll keep this short. I just want to clarify on the tax piece, too.
Oh, can you just, did you say?
Jim Small, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Could you speak up? Sure.
Just pull the mic closer to you.
Okay, on the tax piece, when you do a tax abatement, you have a cost that's simply shifted. all right? And that was that comment. When it comes to bringing in new families, new infrastructure, new houses, you have a step function. So you can add new residents, new children to the public schools without increasing cost, right? Because of the capacity that John had referenced. It's only once it's, you're bumping up against that capacity that you hit that. I'm not 100% certain on this, it's only about 11% of the families get their residences here. So it's a small number. But that, when we talk about, residents are always saying, why do we have to pay for this? Future infrastructure. That infrastructure is amortized over how the bonds are floated 20, 30 years. So that cost gets amortized over that period of time. In addition, it's not just a cost, but it's also the value that Tracy was pointing out. Families bring value to businesses, to the community, right? They bring dynamism. And that's the offset to that cost. So that cost steps up, steps down. It's almost like a wave function. Now, if there were no more families here, our costs would simply go up simply because, of the budget. Right? There's a lot of folks, the personnel costs simply going up by however the cost COLAs are within the contracts. So that should be, if you can distinguish between what's driven by incremental additional family units versus what's a natural inborn raise in the budget from, the
Personnel costs.
yeah, personnel costs. That's it.
Oh, thank you. Okay. We are 4 minutes ahead of schedule.
Okay, well,
Any other public comment? Annie?
Any online?
Any online?
Nope.
No, there is a hiccup with the link, so there may have been some people trying to get on, but I believe that it was fixed. But
Okay, so we have our next meeting is, what do we?
July
July 11th.
July 11th.
And what's the August one?
What's the August one?
8/8.
8/8.
I thought it was the 8th, yeah. I was going to say that.
Right
but
here.
I don't know if I'm right.
8/8. So I would assume by 8/8, we will have a good report back from the city manager's office, just based on city council schedules and our schedule here, about Sherburne. And we will, again, share all the information that we get will come to this, this committee also.
Can I just put in a request that the working groups we've divided up into, we can have that, A, meeting, but B, have that sent out so that we know who's on what group. And then maybe a little conversation next time, just for someone who's a novice at this, about some directives of how we can best go about utilizing those working groups.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great idea, Dave.
Good idea. Thank you.
How would any,
Send that out in an email beforehand, too.
Great, that'd be great.
Yeah. I think it would be in the minutes, but.
it was in the minutes. I apologize. There's
how would any site visits be coordinated if that's
That will be coordinated via staff. So that will go out.
Yeah.
That will go out via email. Any site visits that get scheduled, because we've asked for butter notices to be sent out. So that will be coordinated via staff and then shared with everyone.
Super.
Okay. Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Bye.
Aye. Thank you all so much.